Okay, good evening, everyone. Simon Jacobson here. I welcome the first-time comers and some of the ancient history alumni. So in the spirit of the theme of this evening, I want to begin by saying thank you to everybody here, and spirit of Thanksgiving. So it's not just a Macy's Day parade or holiday sales or succulent turkeys, but actually just the name itself is an extremely powerful one. So my thank you goes to all of you who have enriched my life. As the Talmud says, that we never know who's really doing the teaching and who's doing the listening or the receiving. One of the sages was asked where he learned most from, so he said he learned much from his teachers and even more from his colleagues and friends. And above all, he said, "Mitalmidei yesum mekulam," and above all, I learned most from my students. So actually then it turns he's the student and they're the teachers. So it gets complicated, let's put it that way. We'll talk about that a bit. But so my thank you is for enriching my experience. All of you here, whether you know it or not, are connected in a chain to those that came before you, because we never really advertised this class. It's all word of mouth. And it's now almost 30 years, 28 years, when a man called Sam and his friend Michael called me up and they looking for some spiritual inspiration. In a cold winter night, they came to see me in Brooklyn, 1981 or 82, I don't even remember. It's a long time ago, right? 82 is before fax machines and before computers, before email and internet for sure. I used to use a typewriter then when I was writing. And they came and we hit it off in some formal type of conversation. And they asked if they can come back next week, and they did. And they brought along a friend who was a celebrity and is a celebrity. Part of the Jay and the Americans in the 60s. And now Kenny Vance and the Planetones. And he's here this evening. You'll have to guess who it is, so we'll do this as a, let's see, the guy that looks like a celebrity, okay? See if you can point him out. Maybe you should put on your sunglasses, it may work. It's pretty bright in here. And anyway, but on a good note, and this is the thank you, so Kenny began to bring his friends. And musicians brought musicians, and the musicians brought their accountants, and the accountants brought the lawyers. The ones that remained were primarily musicians. But Kenny would, actually it was called the Kenny Mobile, or the Vance Mobile, I don't even remember what it was called, but he would load up a car from Manhattan or wherever it was, and they would come to my home or my office in Brooklyn. And week after week, for years, and we would sit, we were all younger, and none of us had day jobs, so we would sit sometimes till 3, 4 a.m., even later. Don't get scared. We could do that here too, but you don't have to stay. There are curfews. I know we're all at a different stage in our lives. And we would just talk about matters that matter to us, soul matters and life issues, and we argued, and it was pretty wild. And I give my thank you to Kenny, because frankly without him none of you would be here. Not directly, you may not even know who he is, but it's because he was persistent and brought a few and understood the power. What the Talmud, the Medrash says, a fascinating story about Rabbi Akiva, the great sage. And this is a good message of hope to all of us, because Rabbi Akiva became the greatest Talmudic sage of all time. Where it actually says in the Talmud that the entire Talmud, it goes according to Rabbi Akiva, because the entire Talmud and all the scholars were all shaped by Rabbi Akiva's thinking. And when you say the Talmud, just be aware that United States constitutional law is very much Talmudic based. So you can say our whole legal system today, and many of its intricacies, all go back to this man, Rabbi Akiva. And he's a mysterious figure because he did not grow up in a traditional or even observant and scholarly home. Some say he was a convert, some say he was a child of converts, but regardless, he definitely was absolutely not knowledgeable. And he met this beautiful woman, who was the daughter of an aristocrat, and they fell in love. However, she was a woman of class and distinction and scholarship, and it was she that inspired him to begin studying. But he was 40 years old at the time. That was his age. And he was wondering what to do. He didn't want to make her miserable. He wanted her to respect him. So he went for this walk, one of these philosophical walks. Contemplative, philosophical walks in the woods, thinking about his destiny and what he's going to do. You ever went for such walks? So imagine, he's walking and he's thinking what the future will be. He's 40 years old. He's going to start a new life. He never studied a word of Torah. He knew nothing. Obviously, he was a brilliant man and he had many qualities. But, 40 years, it's a lot of routine and habit there. And as he's thinking about his life and changes that he may or may not make, even in the name of love, he came upon a brook of water, which again always is very conducive to the meditative experience. And he's watching this brook of water, and as he's looking closely, he sees the water spraying the sides, and a little part of the water was rushing down like a small little waterfall. And at the bank of the river, or the rivulet, or the bank of the brook, he noticed a stone, and the stone had a perfectly carved hole right through it. And he looked at it, and he said, "Who would have made the hole out of here in the middle of nowhere? Like it was like actually a deliberately carved, deliberately drilled a hole straight through the stone. Where did it come from? It didn't look natural. It was a stone with a hole through it. I mean, maybe that's where bagels came from, but bagels are man-made, And this was a stone. So he thought about it. And then as he was observing and watching, he noticed that the water that was dripping from the waterfall kept dripping right through that hole. And he realized that this water, over the years, drip by drip, drop by drop, bore this hole right through a stone. And being a man of wisdom and sensitivity, he said to himself, if a inanimate stone, which no one could imagine could ever be pierced, and here this water, not intensely, not with any cataclysmic event, just drop by drop, can pierce a hole through the stone. How can he wonder whether he's 40 years old, or whether he's younger or older, that to make changes in his life? He's a human being with a soul, with a mind, and why would he be trapped in his past? So that moment that he made the decision that he will forge ahead, and he began to study, and he spent several years doing so. The Talmud tells the whole story. And he came back years later, 12 years later, the master of the Talmud, greater than anyone before him or after ever. A man who began at 40 with many scholars as colleagues who were much younger and had been studying their entire lives. And then when he was asked what inspired him to do that, he said, everything I've studied and everything that he said to the students, he had at that point 24,000 students. He said, it's all in her honor. He gave her the credit, because without this woman, he would not have been inspired to do so. Obviously, the stone and the water was a metaphor, but the inspiration came from her. So he said thank you to those. Thank you to the waterfall. Thank you, of course, to his wife. And Kenny, whether he understood it or not at the time, not comparing to Rabbi Akiva exactly, but to some extent, was persistent. And sometimes one person would come to my house, and sometimes two people. And just every Thursday night, then we moved it to Wednesday night. And the steady, drop by drop, now I would say probably over 30,000 people have come to this class over these years. At that point, we weren't even gathering names, or I didn't even know everybody by name. I remember people that I met, but it wasn't an institutionalized thing. Frankly, I always resisted in a way, but at some point it became more practical simply to record people's names so you can be in touch with them and remind them of class and stuff like that. Today we have email. But the heart and the soul of it was the persistence. So that's my thank you to you. And my thank you to all those that were in that chain. Michael is no longer with us on this earth. His soul continues his journey in heaven. Michael Liebert, who ended up later becoming the president of the Carlebach Shul. I mean, everything has its subplots and sub-stories, as you can imagine, a live drama. But I'm here to bear witness that I saw it unfolding, though I had no clue what would be 28 years ago. And I see Lad is here. This is Kenny's son, who was at the time 17 years old, and he came with his friend Jeff, who you see every week almost. It was very moving to me, because how many things last that are good 28 years? I know a lot of pain and wounds that we have from our childhood last many years, but how many good things last? So I could say this, I could feel proud, and not just myself, I say this is a joint effort. And just a lesson to all of us, number one, what persistence is about. It's not about quantity, it's not numbers, it's persistence. And persistence changes the world, that's the bottom line. Whether you like it or not, or whether we understand it or not, because there's something about a steady drop by drop by drop. More than any cramming or crash course or anything like that, it has a certain consistency. So I, through thick or thin, and through rain or shine, Kenny has been a little delinquent, hasn't been coming the last few classes, but I maintain the tradition, just to be aware of that, right? And I see the fruits and the power of it, and may it continue, and may all of you in your lives, the other good things you do, have a perpetual effect in the same way. And it's just about keeping up with it. So basically, the negative things in your life, there's nothing wrong with cutting out. But the positive things, make sure you just persist. Don't give up on it. Because as the Talmud says, for every 1,000 students that go into the academy, only one comes out accomplished. Because people give up. They don't see it through. It's one of the curses, or I guess epidemics of our time, that people don't see things through. You want to call it commitment issues, that's one of the modern terms for it, or you want to call it busy with so many important things, prioritizing. The bottom line is, that is a message and a lesson I think that all of us can learn from. So in that spirit of thank you, and the power of a thank you, I want to talk about that some more, being that it's Thanksgiving, and also, as you'll see, it's very much a central theme in the Torah and in Judaism. The idea of saying thank you. And it's not just a cliche in words of mouthing slogans. Just like how are you, we all know is just, you just say it. Like someone says, how does the line go? The great poem goes like this. When someone asks you, how are you? Don't tell them about your indigestion. Because how are you is a greeting, not a question. It's a bumper sticker style thing. Okay. So there are terms that we say, like when you go in an elevator, you say, well, the weather, so, There are certain things that we've gotten accustomed to. Instead of awkward silence, we say things like, how are you, thank you, goodbye, hello. Different languages, bon appetit, and so on. But the truth is, when you think about it and you step back, there are some things that have become cliches and routine, but they have unbelievable power. So I want to talk about the healing power of thank you, of appreciation. So first a little background, and then we'll talk about the theme itself. In the Torah you'll find several different ways manifest. The idea of a thank you has actually becoming ritualized and institutionalized. For instance, there's a korban. One of the offerings that were brought in the temple was a thing called a korban todah, an offering of thanks. Todah in Hebrew, todah rabbah, we say thank you or thank you very much. Comes from a word in the Torah that todah means to thank. It's an offering that was brought, that when something happens special in your life, or some way, even a miracle, or you found healing, or you found something that you're looking for, or maybe you weren't looking for it, but something special happens to you, it was a mitzvah to bring a Thanksgiving offering, actually. That's the name of it. That's where the pilgrims came up with the Thanksgiving. It's from the Bible. That you give a Thanksgiving, an offering. Whether it's through a physical gift, or it's symbolic, or it's words, or it's prayer, or it's gesture. That's not so relevant. The idea is the concept that you actually do something, and you go out of your way to thank. It's a korban todah. You have, for instance, as well, there's a mitzvah called the mitzvah of Bikurim. Later in the Torah in Deuteronomy, just before the Jews enter the Promised Land, the Torah talks, one chapter is dedicated. Moses tells them, when you'll come into the land, here's another mitzvah God is commanding you, and that is the first fruit that you will plant. When you plant the first harvest, the first fruit of your harvest, you should not use just for your own indulgence, your own needs. The first fruit should be brought bikurim, as a gift and a thank you. At the beginning of your venture, always dedicate to something that's beyond yourself. And that will in turn give you blessing in the rest of what you earn, which will be yours. So even yours will also be blessed with the same blessing because you acknowledged. And this turns into something that is very much part of Jewish tradition, and it's really not noticed. It's become so mechanical, so ritualized, we don't even notice it. But for instance, the custom, and it's a custom, but it became part of Jewish tradition. We teach it to our children that as soon as you wake up in the morning, what's the first word that's supposed to come out of your mouth according to Jewish tradition? Moda, which is like Toda. I thank, I acknowledge. Modeh, Toda, the same root, Hoda. And it's literally the first word, Moda Ani, L'fanecha melech chai v'chaim, shachzate v'nishmasi, b'chem l'rabba munusacha, literally means, I thank you. They don't even mention God's name. I thank you for returning my soul to me in peace and wholesomeness. Different translations, and compassion. Complete faith. So the first word is moda, which is basically the same idea of the bringing the first fruit offering. The concept in the Torah of a b'chor, the firstborn, whether it's the firstborn in the human race, or the firstborn in the animal kingdom, or the firstborn in the vegetable kingdom, as I said, the first fruit, there's something special about the first, not because the first has some type of superiority, it's because when you're blessed with something, the first thing that emerges from your from the fruit of your labor, whether it's a child, whether it's another product of the fruit, you should dedicate and say thank you. And that's why B'char, a firstborn, actually, God said, belongs to me. The B'char was supposed to be of service in the temple, and it was due to some error or some sin of the B'char that it was transferred to the Levites, of the Kohanim, the priests. But till this day we have the mitzvah called Pidyon Haben, the firstborn, actually has to be redeemed in a way, and you pay some money to a Kohen, symbolically, because the firstborn really should be serving not himself, but a higher purpose. So in order to redeem the firstborn, we actually do it, it's 30 days after the child is born. I don't remember my case, but I'm a firstborn, so I'm in that category. And some of you may be. It also affects us on the day before Passover, the firstborn fast. It's a fast day for the firstborn, and that too is redeemed through siyum. But let's not digress here. I was about to say transgress. Digress. And going back to the piyut, I'm just establishing historically and traditionally the basis of thank you. And it's quite interesting because if you look around, you don't usually see it as a religious ritual, the idea of saying thank you. Now, as you know, my emphasis always here is not on the mechanical, but on the deeper soulful and personal meaning. So these things have become mechanical, and people just say Modani without even thinking. They can say Modani, thank you, God, and then a moment later insult God. Or they can say thank you to somebody and then hurt that person. That's just a symbol of, that's just a symptom of our mechanization of rituals. So the deeper meaning behind it is, on the basic level, everyone will say, well, that's quite understandable. Normal thing, someone did a favor for you. Someone helped you in some way. You say thank you. It's a normal thing to do. It's appreciation. But it's a lot deeper than that. So let's look at the other side of things. Sometimes the best way to appreciate something, you have to look at the converse situation. Like the expression in the Talmud, the expression in the Bible is, the word expression goes, Ma'evai tichakmeni. My enemies make me wise. So on a very basic level, it means that by looking at your enemies who want to attack you, you can become very wise about your strengths, and you see what they are focusing on. And the same thing is psychologically. Sometimes the place of deepest resistance, sometimes the things you most hesitate doing, teaches you a lot about yourself. No different than when, let's say, you'd go to a doctor and you have a little pain, God forbid. So the doctor feels about and presses and says, "Do you feel this?" "No, you don't feel it." Then suddenly you yell out in pain. And for the doctor, that's a good sign because now he's identified where it's hurting you. So the place where it hurts, sometimes the place that we most resist, that we don't want to talk about or we don't want to go there, is the place that has most powerful message for us. This has to be done with great care, obviously. So there's that classic Chelm story that has now become part of the healing world of our times. Chelm was this town in Poland where they say the wise people lived, and the neighbors were resentful, so they made up this folklore all about these stupid people of Chelm. Every city has its own Chelm. We've got Chelm in New York as well. We even have everyone has a Chelm inside them somewhere. So there's a lot of Chelm stories. I share some of them here. But one of the classics that's used in healing and therapy is this one. The guy's looking for his keys at night. He lost his keys. So he's looking here, there. A friend comes by, a neighbor, and says, so let me help you look for them. Okay, let's go back to the point of departure, right? Where'd you lose them? So he points like 50 yards away. He lost them there. So he says, why are you looking here then? She says, because here's where the light is shining. Which is used in healing simply, but most of the times we look at the places that we're looking at the most convenient places where we shouldn't be looking. We're looking where the light is shining. No one wants to look in the crevices, in the dark places, in the places that you're uncomfortable going to. No problem. We'll talk about things I'm comfortable with. The places that you should be talking about are the things you're not so comfortable with. Again, I make the disclaimer, this has to be done with care and sensitivity, because to go with a sledgehammer and a cold turkey try to attack sometimes the most sensitive parts can also be hurtful and damaging. So it has to be done carefully. But not to live in a denial that we're going to just talk about things that are comfortable. So it's about being accountable and aware. So sometimes the place we learn most about the appreciation of something powerful is by looking when it's not there. It's like when it comes to, God forbid, abuse. When you grow up in a nurturing, loving home, healthy home, you don't feel its effects, because health doesn't feel like anything. What does it feel like to breathe healthily? If it feels like anything, you're in trouble. It shouldn't feel like anything. If someone asks you what does it feel like to be a healthy person, you should say it feels like nothing. Everything is just working. If you feel any sensation, that's a sign there's an obstruction, or God forbid, or something like that. So growing up in a nurturing, healthy home produces an adult that just functions, that breathes, is secure, is confident, takes on challenges, doesn't have all these phobias and fears, and doesn't need to develop elaborate and complex defense mechanisms to cover his or her tracks. Does that sound familiar to anybody here? The healthy side, I mean. Yeah, we wish it, right? How many people ever meet that are in that category? So when it's working, it doesn't feel like anything. Things are just functioning. It's like breathing. It's just smoothly breathing. God forbid, when there's an obstruction, you see someone struggling to breathe, you know there's a problem. And that's when you feel something. You need support. You need to get rid of the impediment, etc. So the same is true in the context of things we do in our lives. If you ever want to appreciate something important that's necessary, it's always good to do at least a mental exercise of what would it be if you didn't have it. And then you suddenly can appreciate something that you were taking for granted. So we all can put ourselves in these shoes and use an example. Have you ever done a favor for someone, and that person simply didn't recognize it, didn't appreciate it, overlooked you, ignored you? I don't think there's anyone that hasn't had that experience. The question is whether it's legitimate or not is another story. Many of us feel we should have been appreciated when you really didn't do anything. That's another. I'm not getting into that. That's already a matter of our own perceptions and so on. And the truth is, secure people are also able to get over being ignored or being not appreciated or thanked for something. But the bottom line is, we've all understand that situation, and we've probably been in more than once, where you feel you should have gotten credit and you didn't. I have to elaborate a bit on this, because that too can become a problem. Because, as you know, in any project, as they say, failure is an orphan, and success has many fathers and mothers. When something succeeds, everybody's lining up for credit and for royalties and so on. Someone told me a few months ago, I was discussing an idea about, someone came to me about this, some type of theatrical production. And another person who was involved and said, don't go into anything theatrical, because as soon as anything is going to succeed on Broadway or off-Broadway and so on, there'll be there's immediate lawsuits. He said, like, without any exception. And he gave me a story. He told me about some play that became somewhat successful. I don't know how successful, but successful. And not one lawsuit, but like 12 lawsuits. And one of them was from the landlord, a woman of the building where the playwright lived, because she said he took some of the stories from episodes that happened when she went up and down the stairs. So she needs to, so she deserves royalties. Now, the point is not whether she's right or not. The point is that that it's a lawsuit, and with lawsuits, it's better just sometimes to settle, even if the person is wrong, because it's litigation. So it's interesting. This is another study in human nature about money and credit and royalties and so on. Nobody likes to admit how much credit they really want to get, but when you start getting down to it, which is why best to always have someone representing you or somebody doing everything up front, because once things start happening, because people out of pride, I'm not going to say, listen, I want my credit, and I want my name first and your name second. How many people are saying that? The people that say that are actually, in a way, they're more honest and usually more cutthroat. But the more sensitive ones and the more evolved ones doesn't, as they say in Yiddish, doesn't pass. Your pride and dignity doesn't let you say it. But it's what you're feeling anyway. And then there's the resentment when that doesn't happen. So that's another episode which really deserves another discussion, not tonight, because I don't want anyone going away from this discussion and saying Rabbi Jacobson said that since it's Thanksgiving, I deserve all these royalties and credits and so on from everybody that, to send everybody a bill, basically. That's not my point here tonight. That story where the guy is sitting in a shul near a lawyer is sitting near his doctor, and the doctor is complaining to the lawyer. He says, what do I do? Everyone comes over to me during Shabbos with all kinds of medical questions. If they came in the middle of the week, I would bill them. On Shabbos, it's like, what am I? I'm not going to give them advice or not tell them suggestions. So he says, look, you don't bill them today. It comes Monday. Tell your nurse, tell your secretary, remember in your mind who asked you for what, and send them a bill as you would do that. You would do with, if they came middle of the week. He said, hey, that's a great idea. Okay, fine. And you'll see how few people start coming to you on Shabbos, Well, lo and behold, he comes to his office Monday and does it, and Tuesday he gets a bill in the mail from the lawyer for that advice. So, my point to this evening is not to go away and make a whole list of people that owe you things and thank yous and so on. I'm actually talking about the other way around. I'd like everybody to go here tonight to say how many people we have to thank, not how many have to thank you. That's the emphasis tonight. Are giving thanks, not demanding it from others. And you'll see from our discussion that the more you are able to, the more you receive as well. So this idea of being deprived of appreciation is just as an example to identify. So let's take a scenario where you actually really did something, you really went out of your way to help somebody. And you didn't do it for thanks or for acknowledgement or for any rewards. But the fact is the other person you realize simply doesn't appreciate. They take for granted what you did. And again, not because you want them to go out of the way and do something special, but even basic thing, you see they just forgot the whole thing as if you never did it for them. How does it make you feel? It's extremely demoralizing. Because one of the most demoralizing things in life is being ignored, is being overlooked. Again, I'm speaking now in the healthy sense of it, where I'm not, I'm just keep saying that because I know sometimes I say things and later I get sued by different people because they use my words. I'm just kidding. So it's in a certain scenario where it actually happened and you weren't expecting anything, but you just feel that way because being ignored, being overlooked is an extremely a demoralizing sense because it's like, completely not appreciated for any effort you made. What really is going on when a person is ignored? So the Talmud actually tells a story. It's interesting with whom the story is. It happens to be with Jesus. That when he went, before he left so-called the fold, the Jewish fold, he was a scholar, he was part of the academies. So he came to see his teacher, but his teacher was in the middle of davening, middle of Shema. So he made with his hands for him to walk away. Now he didn't mean for him to leave. He meant just like wait till I finish praying. And he took to mean Jesus, the Talmud says, that it was a way of rejecting him. And because he so-called rejected him, he said, okay, that's it. I will not return any longer. So the Talmud says, and we actually have a law that's derived from this in Jewish law, that if you're a teacher, never ever give the impression to your student that you're rejecting that student. Even if that's not what you're intending. Like in this case, he should have stopped the prayer and said to him, so he shouldn't misunderstand what his motion meant. Because in the Torah, one of the worst things possible is ignoring somebody or making them feel like they're rejected. There are many laws that actually address this. For instance, the law of if you haven't seen someone for 30 days, you're supposed to go out of your way, even if you're in the middle of praying to God, and acknowledge that person. You learn from Abraham, a few chapters ago we read it, how Abraham turned away from God, but God came to visit him after he had circumcised himself. And God is speaking to him, and he turns away from God to greet 3 strangers, 3 nomads. He had no idea they were angels, but they were 3 nomads in the desert. And we learn from that greeting guests is greater than greeting God. As I explained a few weeks ago, it actually means, how did Abraham know that? Because he knew greeting human beings is greeting God in another way. These are human beings created in the divine image. So in essentially, ignoring a human being is like ignoring God. Because it's not just not a menschliche thing, and not a gracious, or not a kind thing to do. That's on a very basic level. It's much more fundamental than that. It's you are denying the dignity that a human being deserves because God put them on this earth. So subtly, even though you may not be saying it quite in those words, taking them for granted or ignoring them, you're essentially really denying God. It's interesting, the Founding Fathers, in the Declaration of Independence, of all the things they chose to open up the Declaration is this biblical axiom, because they understood in their wisdom that without it, there is no foundation for any democracy. And the way they put it is exactly this. They use men, but the Torah would say all human beings are created equal. And by virtue of that creation, I'm paraphrasing, but essentially that's what it says, we have inalienable rights to freedom, the pursuit of happiness, and so on, and all the rights. The basic human rights that were denied to human beings through most of history, till 200-300 years ago, by monarchs or the church or others who thought they knew better what's right for us, the Founding Fathers understood this is the foundation that cannot be wavering in any way. Inalienable rights. Nobody can ever take away those rights, because if they can, then the whole basis of the Constitution falls apart. Because you could say the majority decides that this minority don't have these rights. That's why they said it's the creator. And that was debated as well, because they were deists. They were not advocating religion, as a matter of fact, separation of church and state. So why would they even put the word creator in there? Created equal. They could have said all men are born equal, all people are equal. I mean, there are many words. They referred to create because they realized that if it's human beings giving other human beings rights, then they could also revoke those rights. But if it's inalienable, meaning nobody can take them away because they're given to us bestowed by the fact, the virtue of our birth, of our creation, then nobody can touch that. Nobody can tamper. No monarch, no king, no brilliant professor, no one can take that away because it was not given to us by humans. It's not something that was voted upon. It's the virtue of our existence. So interesting, if you just cut to that essential theme, that's the essence of the modern world of freedom, the freedom and the essential, uncompromising rights that each of us have, including, ironically, the right to deny God. I always wonder about this irony. Would atheists give believers that same right? Because if there's no God, then who says everybody's equal? But the believer has to believe that everyone has a right to choose what they believe, what they don't believe, by virtue of the fact that God put you here. So you have that choice. You may not agree with the choice, but we have the right to make our choices. So ignoring someone and not saying thank you, not acknowledging them, is not a small matter. It's actually ignoring God's presence through that human being. Or to use the words of the Bible, the human being is created in the divine image. And by that virtue, the divine image means you are unique and indispensable. So in any way you are not appreciated for something you do, or ignored, or overlooked. You're tampering with the dynamics of existence, not just whether we're going to be nice to each other. Because from a more Darwinian perspective, you could say, why we say thank you is because when you say thank you, then the other person will reciprocate, and it's a give and take. And we'll all coexist this way. It's like red lights and green lights. There's nothing fundamental about a red light or green light, but if everybody's driving in every direction, we won't get anywhere, or we could hurt each other. So we have this mutual social contract. I say thank you, you say thank you, I say thank you, you say you're welcome, you say no, there's no need, and the whole thing. So it's like a give and take. It's like a contractual agreement where we're just kind to each other because it makes society work better. That happens to be true, technically, But what I'm saying here is much more fundamental than that. That's arbitrary. That means if you can get away by not saying thank you because you're not going to get anything from the other person, why say it? What I'm mentioning here is that it's absolute. You're saying thank you and acknowledging another person is not a question because you're going to get something in return. It's because you're acknowledging God created that person, and that person is valuable, period. Regardless whether you benefit from that person or you don't benefit from that person. So you see here, touches a whole philosophical core value system of how we look at life. And let's put it in very stark contrast. If you use the story from the Alter Rebbe, there was a chassid who came to him, and he came with a whole grocery list of needs. He needs health, he needs money, he needs this, he needs that. He had all kinds of things that he needs. And he continued reading all the needs, which is why you come to a Rebbe, he wants a blessing for all these things. But this chassid happened to also be a person that could hear, if you dish it out, you could also have to take it. So the Rebbe, at the end, when he finishes reading the list, looks at him and smiles and says to him, anything else? Like on your list? Or like you've exhausted everything you need, basically everything from A to Z. So the Rebbe, then the Alter Rebbe, this Reb Shneur Zalman, a few hundred years ago, says to him, okay, I know what you need. My question is, what do you need it for? I don't know if JFK lifted that line from the Alter Rebbe, but when he said, ask not what the country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. But that's what Alter Rebbe says. I know what you need. But my ask the question is, what do you need it for? Why are you here? And this question is not just a small matter. It's not like he was denying the person's needs and denying that he deserves them and sure they gave him a blessing. But he was pointing out something to him, that sometimes you get so focused with what you need, you forget why you are needed. Who needs you? And if you know why you're needed, then you can say to God, look, here's why I'm needed, and therefore I have needs to be able to fulfill why I'm needed, my mission in life. Really, it comes down to, as I said, two approaches. Are you here to be served by others and by the world? Or are you here to serve? Now, I know it sounds so simplistic to put it in those two terms, because anyone with a little subtlety and seichel will say, well, what do you mean? Both. That's the best answer, both. That way we get away with getting anywhere, But the fact of the matter is, by nature, we are narcissistic creatures. When you wake up in the morning, the first thought you have in your mind is not who you're going to serve today. Your first question is what you're going to get today. How can you take and how can you receive and how will you get your needs met? You wake up, you feel hungry. Hunger is a sign of your needs. You don't think about somebody else's hunger. You don't feel someone else's hunger. If you train yourself, you could say, you know what? Let me think about another person before I think about myself. But that requires effort. That's an acquired effort. That's not natural. Our natural instinct is what the Torah puts it, avas atzmei, self-love. Called the self... that's a word, but that's another word. I was looking for a different word. We'll get to self-interest. Self-interest is the driving force in our lives, naturally, in our feelings. We're going to discuss if it's actually so, but that's definitely the beginning point of our lives in this material world. Self-interest. So as I said, the first thing naturally in our inclination is what do I need and how do I get it? If you want to analyze it a little more on a social, scientific level, essentially what I like to call the Darwinian Freudian model, which is the prevalent model of Western thought in most of our schools, is the driving force of the species is survival. Survival is as narcissistic as it gets. I must survive. And therefore I'll do whatever it takes to survive. Natural selection is based on this. And the competition begins. Survival of the fittest. So the strongest predators, the healthiest, would be the ones that survive, will be the ones that breed, will be the ones that are chosen by their partners to breed with. And you see this consistently. This is everywhere today. in every class, in every analysis of human nature, and definitely animal nature, it's all this driving force. And since we human beings have evolved essentially from lower species of creatures, this hasn't changed. We too are narcissistic in essence. So where Darwin spoke more on the scientific level, some turned it what they call social Darwinism, using Freud, turned it into the psychological model. Now the psychological model is that the id, the ID, is your driving engine, and it's all about me and my needs. Pure narcissism. However, the fact is, to coexist with others, we, as intelligent creatures, figure out ways to part of survival is also giving to some extent. So we have what we call an ego and a superego, and Freud has his whole analysis of it. Now, where did they get all this from, Freud and others? No one's ever seen the soul. Like if you said someone had dissected the soul in a laboratory, and they cut to the core of the soul and they found it to be a little creature in there that says, I want, I need, then you could say that's the case. So where did all these great scientists get this from? Obviously from self-observation. When you are narcissistic, you obviously see that as the natural driving force. So whenever you see someone that's giving, you say, oh, there must be something behind it. Because you can't imagine that someone's not like you. We do this all the time. It's called projection in the world of psychology. The Torah absolutely, categorically rejects this approach. But more importantly, it doesn't reject it. The Torah actually has a model before all these models were developed. And this is essentially the driving model of the Torah and Judaism. And that is, as I mentioned earlier, that the human being was created in the divine image. And we are fundamental givers, not takers. So it's true that the id is a powerful force, as we'll discuss in a moment. But the Torah would say there's one layer deeper that Freud didn't reach, though he was Jewish. Maybe it was his mother that got in the way. And that is not the id, but the yid. Okay? Instead of ID, he's missing the Y. The pintel, the yud, the pintel, the spark. And this is how the Torah puts it. And this is biblical verses I'm citing here. It says the following. In the Bible, in chapter 1, Genesis, it says, the human being was created in the divine image. Okay. In chapter 2, there's an expression that says, Yetzer leva adam ramin urav. That the inclination of a human being is evil from birth or from childhood. A direct contradiction. If the human being was created in the divine image, as is stated in the beginning of the Bible, first chapter, what is this Yetzer? What is this inclination? So here's where we get the original source, in case you're wondering, for the concept that you may have heard of, the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Hara. Yetzer means a side, an inclination. That we have two voices and two dimensions. One is inclined toward divine, transcendental, you could say selfless activity, and the other is inclined toward selfish narcissism. So the big question is this: which one's more powerful? I'm not talking about in actuality. We all know in actuality which one is more powerful. Can you guess? The one that's more powerful in our lives is, of course, the survival one, the I. But which one is really, who are you really in essence? So you could say, well, maybe we're both in essence. That's not the case. The way the Torah puts it is, in essence, you are the divine image. It got hijacked on its way, and in some way got, we'll call it, packaged and clothed and in garments and layers that created another personality called the selfish personality. And that's where Freud begins. But the first half, either he didn't know, or he couldn't identify with it because he himself didn't discover it within himself, or whatever it may be. But the Torah identifies and says there are two distinct forces, and sadly, obviously the latter one dominates until you discover, or you go on a journey, or unfortunately it often happens through pain and suffering, you suddenly discover there's another part to you. When do we discover the most noble part to ourselves? Sadly, it's often in tragic times, in traumatic times. Even though sometimes it brings the worst out of us, but it can also bring the best out of us. So in the model that I was referring to earlier, like the Darwinian, Freudian model, an act of nobility is an anomaly, or it's tit for tat, a noble person because he's going to get, or she's going to get something in return. From the Torah's point of view, nobility and selflessness is the natural state of the soul. And the other part, which so dominates our lives, is the anomaly, is the aberration. Yes, so essentially, most of our lives is a life of aberration, basically. And we've convinced ourselves it's what's natural. When you study Torah, the first thing you come to discover is this truth. And when it resonates, and you have a moment, an epiphany, that's what you discover. That this whole person, me, and the rest of the world that I thought is all about narcissism, that's not necessarily who I really am. Now, I'm not here to convince anyone of this. This is something you either discover and recognize, because it's not something you can persuade someone. Because remember, we're invested more in the narcissistic approach, because then it justifies our selfishness, and also says, listen, everyone else is that way anyway, so what's the big thing? So it's just a question of survival of the fittest. He's going to kill me, so I might as well kill him first, type of thing. Dog eats dog. But those that have chosen, let's call it the path, the road less traveled, and when you talk about people like Rabbi Akiva that I mentioned, or Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and I will tell you, Judaism, driven by the pioneers like Abraham, chose another path. Abraham saw a world like that. And he actually he grew up in a prosperous home. It wasn't like he suffered. He was in a very prosperous home. His father was the biggest idol manufacturer of his time. He knew exactly what someone needed, and he gave it to them. It was called an idol. It was called, tell me what kind of God you like today. Oh, this type of God? Here you have it. Now, then it was maybe in one shape. Today it's another shape. Everyone's selling something that we think we need. Or they convince us we need it. It's just another idol worship. Basically is self-worship. That's the bottom line here. And Abraham sensitively, wisely, soulfully recognized this can't be it. But of course he knew that his path is going to be difficult, because it means a path that's not going to be embraced, that will be threatening to everyone around. Because remember, in a world of narcissists, one real giving person is a threat, because it's their conscience. It reminds you that may not be that way, and you always want to kill the witness. Actually, the Torah is somewhere else. One of the prophets says, one of the mysteries, we all try to wonder, what is this, the mystery behind Anti-Semitism? So one of the prophets actually puts it, it's about killing the witness. If the Jewish people were witnesses to God, and they were witnesses that you can live a life that is selfless, what do the criminals in the world want to do? They have to destroy that witness. You see this all the time. They think that's the solution. It's not about embracing the truth. It's about getting rid of anyone that's going to remind us that we may not be on the right path. I'm not saying this in any condescending way. Perfect timing. Jeff, I didn't say anything to disturb you, did I? Okay. He just fell over his blew you away? Okay. So these are the two paths, and they're complicated because, yes, they do get intertwined. It's not like whether you choose one or the other. I'm not suggesting here this evening that we go away and suddenly lose all your self-interests and all your needs and just simply forget about that. That's not the point here. The point is just to live with a glimmer of a ray of possibility that maybe there's another entity or reality inside of you. And just let it out once in a while. And you'll see it weakens the hold of that other narcissistic side. So to go back to this thank you and acknowledgement and appreciation, the lack thereof, as I mentioned, is essentially an insult to the divine plan, because here you have an indispensable human being who really should be appreciated even if they did nothing for you. That's one thing. But especially if they did a favor or did something for you, whether it was with a big effort or not effort, the fact that you can overlook that is a sign that it's not about God, it's not about the other person, it's about you. To the point that some people actually feel a sense of entitlement, where they deserve that. What do you mean? I mean, there are people, they may not acknowledge it, but I've met some people like that, and I'm sure some of you have met, I hope none of you are in this category, who not only don't say thank you, they actually really think or feel, without saying as much, that you should be thanking them for the privilege of serving them. There are people who have that feeling of being God's gift, and that sense of entitlement, that I'm actually superior, and you should be happy that I even looked at you and allowed you to bring me a cup of tea. Now, this interesting dynamic, I study it sometimes, and it doesn't make me very comfortable. When you go to a restaurant, for example, you have the waiter serving you, right? So there's some waiters who are just bitter in their job because they don't, they say, well, why should I be serving you? You should be serving me. They don't say as much, but they give you that message. Then there are people who are extremely pleasant. And I often think, I said, it is a little weird where somebody's serving you. I understand they're getting paid and they need to pay off their school loans or whatever it is, or their part-time job. But I don't know if it ever makes you uncomfortable. Sometimes it can make you uncomfortable, especially when you see your neighbor next table starts yelling at the waiter like they're, Now, and about petty things that are not life and death. I understand it's the way of the world, and I'm not coming out here with a formal call against this whole class structure, which is, you can read Marx about that if you like. However, it's just a food for thought, to be aware of these things. And there are people who have that sense of entitlement, whether it's because they grew up in an entitled home, or they're spoiled, or they just see the world in two classes, us, superior ones, upper class, and those servants. Many people who've made a lot of money, and I know quite a few, and one of them once told me in a moment of vulnerability that when you make a lot of money, and people obviously will do anything to buy your favor, so if you're not that, if you're that selfish, you don't look at it, so you just think, I'm really actually that important. But this person happened to know he's not that important. He understood that it's all about the money, and it had nothing to do with his own value. And he says, what you learn about people is the worst comes out because you see they'll do anything. They'll prostitute themselves in the worst possible ways. And if it gets to your head, you actually think you are superior because look at them. But if you step back and think about it, what happens if I had lost my money? I may be one of them, prostituting myself to someone that has more money. And then you come to discover, is what he told me, that you're doing it anyway, even with the money, because you're always trying to hold on to it or trying to make more. So it becomes a very vicious cycle. And when you dwell on this, you sometimes almost envy those people that were able to have the strength to just cut away from this whole civilization and escape to some natural place where they don't have to deal with this ugly side of human nature. But that's not something that most of us will be doing. So we have to live in the jungle. The scouts, the Bible says, when they went to visit to scout out, to spy out the promised land, the big classic statement they made, the immortal words they used were, we cannot enter this promised land. And they use Eretz Echeles Yeshveh, because it's a land that consumes its inhabitants. Now think of that, what that means. It means it's a land that we will no longer be in control of ourselves, because the land and the laws of the land and the social mores and the social rules of the demands upon us and the give and take that is so much part of the fabric of any marketplace will consume its inhabitants. And nobody is immune. Everybody will be consumed. And when you look at history, you see that to be the case. So their statement was very powerful. They really understood. The challenges of a material world. So what was their crime? And it's considered to be one of the greatest crimes that till this day we still haven't repaid it. It's their sin was that no one asked them whether you can do it or not. God said, I'm giving you the promised land and I'm giving you these challenges. I'm sending your soul down to this earth. And it is a narcissistic world and it's a cruel world and people hurt each other. But I'm still giving you the strength to know that you have the power to not become part of that. You don't have to become part of the problem. You can be part of the solution. And I'm giving you the strength to overcome all of that. Which is unbelievable vote of confidence. It's basically God saying to each of us that despite how cruel people can be, and we've seen that in many ways, even not only in World War II, but even today, it may not always manifest itself in killing someone physically, but you can kill someone spiritually, you can kill someone emotionally and psychologically and so on. We see it all the time. So think of the cumulative pain that people can inflict on someone else. And then God says, despite all that, your soul has the power to not only balance it out, but to actually reverse the current, and that you can bring light into such a dark place. That means your soul has more power than the narcissism of this world. That's a pretty powerful vote of confidence. And as the mystics and the sages and the great people we read about, what do you think it made Abraham so special? Because he came to believe that. And once he came to believe it, he was unstoppable. Because he didn't really care whether there are 1 billion people or 6 billion people on this planet all out for their own interest. He knew that he's connected to something that's more powerful than that. So you think one man against the world. You know, this one man basically changed the history. He gave birth to his son Isaac, which itself was a miracle. And today, basically, almost all morality on this earth comes from that man. Think about it, thousands of years. Because Abraham's children would not just be the ancestors of the Jewish people. Isaac, Jacob, is the Jewish ancestry. But Ishmael becomes the forefather of what would later become the Muslim Arab world. Esau, Abraham's grandson, the brother of Jacob, who we read about in these chapters, becomes the forefather of Rome, Western world, and Christianity. And even in the East and Far East, they associate, many associate their roots also to Abraham. Abraham sent his children to the East. There are chapters about it. That's why you find in Buddhism the concept of Brahmin. Brahmin comes from the word Abraham, Ibram, in Arabic and other languages of the East. But regardless of that, here's a man that has left a legacy because of only one reason. He chose a path that no one else was going to choose. And it shows you that, yes, there is a soul, that a soul has the power to counter the forces of all narcissism. So there's an interesting expression that the Mittler Rebbe, the second Chabad Rebbe, is named the Dov Ber, the son of the founder of the system. So he once said the statement like this: when two people come together, it's two divine souls. When two people do something good together, it's two divine souls against one animal soul. If you recall, I said that we have two voices, the two sides. We have the Yetzer Tov, which is the good inclination, selflessness, transcendent and divine, to serve. And we have another voice, which is selfishness, self-interest. And there are two they battle with each other, like Esau and Jacob battled with each other. So he's saying here that when two people come together, let's say two of us come together and make a decision to do something good, so it's two divine souls, two Yetzer Tovs against one Yetzer Hara. That's what he says. So the obvious question is, why is that the case? It's two divine souls against two animal souls. Those two people have two animal souls. Why is it two against one? It's two against two. So it doesn't have to go back to square one. They balance each other out. And the answer given is there's a halachic law that says, Ein adam chayte v'lei loi, which means a person sins and transgresses. They never transgress for someone else's interest. They only transgress for their own interest. When it comes to self-interest, there's no two that come together. Because ultimately, if you're coming together with someone, it's because you see that that's part of your self-interest. It's two selfish people who happen for a moment to be doing something together, but they're not truly unified, because as soon as your selfishness dictates that the other person, you don't need them, you'll get rid of them too. Whereas the divine souls, because they're dedicated to a selfless cause, they actually unite as one, like two flames. So it's two against one. Did you get that? I'll give you an example. Well, it's an example actually in this week's chapter. When Esau, it's an interesting little episode. It's an aside, but so Esau is the wise, the warrior, wily, shrewd. So he came up with a great idea. He decides to go marry the daughter of Yishmael, his uncle, his first cousin. And he comes to Yishmael the day of the chuppah, the day of the wedding, and he says the following. He says, look, your father, Abraham, had two sons, you and my father, Isaac. And my grandfather Abraham has a lot of money. So I have a great idea. You kill your brother Isaac. I'll kill my brother Jacob. And you and I will be the sole heirs to the throne. You following along? Okay. Yishmael, who himself was no slouch, says to Esau, 1 second. He suddenly became religious for a moment. He says, Haloi Kainanech, you think I'm like Cain? Cain and Abel. I'm going to go kill my brother? Obviously, he was thinking to himself, with such a brilliant idea, you probably have another plan that you're not sharing with me, which is, after I kill my brother, Isaac, and you kill your brother Jacob, then there's the two of us. So the same logic, what do you need to share it with me? You're going to come kill me. And also you'll be a tzaddik. Because since I killed your father, there's a mitzvah to avenge your father. And that's what you're going to do. How does he know this? Because if anyone comes to you and say, listen, let's come together and kill someone else, and we remain, you can be rest assured that as soon as they can get to you, they're going to use the same logic again, right? So even though we all fall into this trap, someone badmouths another person to you, rest assured that you'll be badmouthed as well. So you may be relishing right now in the nice gossip, but you're next on the block. That's how it goes. People who talk about somebody talk about everybody. They don't distinguish. It's just right now convenient to find someone else, a third so-called scapegoat. So bottom line is, that's why he says that when it comes to the divine voice inside of us, that truly unites with others because it's not driven by selfishness, it's driven by selflessness. Those two people joining in a selfless effort you can trust is twice as powerful. And the synergy of twice as powerful. Whereas two people, their self-interests, that ultimately for a moment they may come together, but it doesn't last long. Like one of these older Hasidim who once told me, I remember years ago, he said to me, you don't take a partner because you like him. You take a partner because you can't do it without him. He gave me this rule. I don't know if this is true in every case, but it has certain truth to it, business at least. So, to go back to the theme of acknowledgment, thanksgiving, thank you, and so on. What you see here is not that it's a lot deeper concept and idea than just being kind to each other. As I said earlier, that can be also a mutual interest and also driven by self-interest. You say thank you, you look good, you may get a favor in return. In every business school they teach you, be cordial. And you'll see people who climb to the top often, though there are cutthroats and there are definitely people who are quite obnoxious, but you'll see quite a few successful people have mastered that art of being cordial because cordiality is paid in return, people remember it. Whereas if you behave obnoxiously, it's also remembered. You'll do something, you'll go out of your way to do something for someone who was nice to you. That's how it is. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's not even anything wrong if you do it for that reason. What I'm suggesting here, that there's another dimension to it, and that is our attitude to life. Our attitude to life. So though we have within us, as I said, a voice that comes very easy to us, that when you wake up in the morning, your self-interest, yourself is the dominant voice. And it's usually the one that dominates your whole day, your entire day. But the interesting thing, especially when you study this in the Kabbalah, you come to learn that is, you have been taken hostage by that voice, to the point where you think that's the natural you. Deep embedded within you, in your soul, is the real you, that emerges not often, but when it does, it resonates with the power of truth. That when you do something for someone with absolutely nothing, no expectations, what happens then is you're giving and you're expressing the natural self of the soul. See, because the soul knows, not the soul inside your body, which, as I said, been hijacked and taken hostage, but your soul in its essence knows that it was sent to this earth for a purpose, to bring light, to serve, to illuminate. It was not sent here to take. To take, it didn't have to come down to this long, arduous journey to go from heaven to earth. It could stay in heaven and bask in its spiritual delights and whatever else happens up there in heaven. Why did it have to come to earth? Because the soul knows that it came to serve. And it was given all the strengths necessary and all the powers necessary to achieve and fulfill its mission on this earth. In generic terms, for all of us, it is to transform the material selfishness of this world into a selfless environment. And the soul has absolute confidence and is secure in its mission. Remember, someone that is absolutely confident and secure doesn't need to take. As a matter of fact, it abhors taking. Because taking is a symbol of not being complete or being dependent and needy on others. The Talmud says that receiving a gift, living off a gift, is called nema d'chsufa. It means the bread of shame. Using the expression because by human nature, naturally at least, we appreciate $1 that we earn on our own more than $9 that we are given as a gift. Even though 9 is 9 times as much as 1, but the fact is it's easier to blow because it's not, you haven't earned it. The things you've earned in your life, you hold on to because you feel that it's product of your labor, fruits of your labor. So, by human nature, even though we'd all love to get gifts, the fact is, a person who has earned something knows deep inside there's a deep security because you have earned it. It's like no one can take that away from you ever. Whereas something that's given to you, even though you may be wealthier and easier, your life may be much more comfortable, but there's something inside you that remains undeveloped and insecure. Because deep inside, whether you acknowledge it or not, unconsciously, you know you never owned it. It was given to you. You see sometimes children growing up in homes of wealth. And I know a few. They speak to me about it. Some are aware of it, some are not. Some may be in this room here. And I don't mean to say this in any insulting way, but often, or sometimes, part of the product of growing up in a home like that, you become, I don't know what's the word for it, I don't want to say castrated, emasculated, because you never put great effort toward it. And your pride doesn't let you acknowledge that, so you convince yourself that it's like you behave as if it's yours. But it's never as if yours, and yours is not the same thing. It's a big difference, something that's earned. Healthy parents understand that and will help a child, not just spoil them and teach them to earn it. At the same time, not necessarily deprive them, but give them the challenge that they need in life. You know, they say, I read this a few places, that in general, when you study the demographics, the history of wealth, great wealth, besides what Balzac wrote, that every great fortune is connected to some great crime, which is another discussion, is also that every great fortune within 3 generations either turns the family against each other to the point of absolute war, or the money is blown for whatever reasons, whether it's litigation or bad mistakes or people who are spending it who didn't really appreciate it because they never earned it, etc., etc. One of the exceptions is John Rockefeller, who writes in his biography that when he discovered and came to age that he is a child of wealth, his father was enormously the wealthiest man in America, Standard Oil, and he realized, how is he going to accomplish more than his father did? It'll never happen. You know, he has all this money and he's not even motivated to do it because it's all in place already. Yes, he can continue the business and so on, and his ego or his pride wanted to achieve something as great. So what he developed was, he says, you know what, I'll achieve the brilliance in the exact opposite of my father did. Brilliance in philanthropy, to create a science of how to give it away. And he in turn worked years in developing a whole system of philanthropy, which still remains the model of a lot of philanthropic systems today. Because he understood this element. He did not want to go down in the illusion that he's such a great guy because he just inherited a lot of money and just continuing he wanted to achieve something. So whether you agree with all his approaches or not, but it was interesting, quite wise of him. And more importantly, it's not the wisdom, it's the discipline. Because most people in that situation, they don't need to do it. There's nothing motivating. You don't need the money. So it all has to come from some voice inside of you that really wants to make a mark. And realize that you don't want to live in a delusion that... But most of us choose the easier approach. Well, most people will choose the easier approach. So to go back to this idea, so the soul, from its perspective, if you can speak completely from the perspective of the soul, is absolutely secure and confident in its strengths. And it could spend its entire life just giving. It doesn't need to take from anyone. God did make a symbiotic relationship that we all need each other for different things. In that sense, yes, there's a certain complementation. Like, think of it like musical notes. So if you're able to speak to the musical notes in a composition, let's just have an imaginary dialogue with them. And the musical notes will say to you, you know, we are here, each of us was placed here by a composer, and we have a note to play. And when it comes my turn, I will play my note perfectly. Each note is absolutely confident in its own ability, because it's there, it knows what it has to do, and it will do it. At the same time, That confidence allows it to coexist with the neighborly notes, so to speak, what comes before and comes after, because it knows each has their role to play. I mean, that's like a perfect world. Everyone doing their thing, no one overstepping the boundary, no one trying to take away another note because you don't know what your note is. That's the perfect example of harmony within diversity. You know, a complex system, but it's a system that works absolutely synchronized with each other. Another example is our own healthy human bodies. The human body is made up of 75 trillion cells, and all the different systems and organs and details and so on. And yet it works together in a healthy body as a unit. And every unit appreciates the other units. So in that type of situation, of course, that's how a soul sees existence. But that's not how we see it. Why? Because we are not looking through the lens of the soul. We look through the lens of the soul as it's manifest in a body that's needy, that's weak at times, that's insecure, that may have grown up in an unnurtured home, may have developed many insecurities and fears and phobias, and it's trying to maneuver in this world and sees people taking advantage of each other, and is constantly aware of that and has to develop defense mechanisms. And the whole mess, basically, that we're in, comes especially when it comes to relationships. So that perspective is a whole different perspective. You can imagine how sad our soul feels that we see it that way when it's sitting right inside of you, waiting and telling you, I have a voice that is who you are, unique, and you have something to contribute. But most of our lives we're living with that other voice, with that other personality, so to speak. And that personality has a whole different approach, like a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde thing. That personality is constantly looking to hunt, the warrior, to take, because it doesn't have enough, it doesn't feel secure with what it has, it doesn't know its real place, like the musical note. And in that sense, is also in a situation where it doesn't necessarily recognize the idea of saying thank you properly. Because, firstly, on its own level, it's all about me. So it's all about me, then when people do something for you, you don't necessarily have it in balance. A soul's perspective is, look, we live in this world, we all need each other, and we'll say all the time thank you to each other, because I need you, you need me, I'm secure in my position, so my saying thank you to you doesn't make me weaker because you did something for me and saved my life or saved my existence. I know I need to be here, and we all need each other. So thank you comes naturally, and it's easy. It's the respect and the appreciation, as I said, of the dignity and the absolute indispensability of every creature on this earth, every human being. Saying thank you, on the other hand, in the true sense of it, is allowing your soul to speak. That's what it comes down to. So in a sense, you can say, maybe a new therapeutic method, the healing power of saying thank you. So let's say Thanksgiving 2009, we discovered the healing power of saying thank you. Try it out at Thanksgiving dinner tomorrow night. You know, not in a corny way. I don't mean corny as in Cornish hen or Cornish turkey. I meant in a philosophical way. You can begin philosophically. It's a great exercise to think about. And it's also a good conversation piece. Thanksgiving, it's a good title for an article, for a book. The healing power of saying thank you, or thank you. Obviously, it's not just the words; it's the gesture, it's the acknowledgement. So, on a practical level, as I said earlier, thank you is both to the people in our lives that may have helped us along the way, that we may have forgotten, for our own blinded moment, selfishness, or just taking it for granted. But above all, maybe it begins, and it's not disconnected from saying thank you to God. So you say Moed Ani in the morning, every morning, literally. You wake up, and the first thing you do, naturally the first thing you do is think about yourself. And say, what do I need? And I'm hungry, or this, or I'm that, in a bad mood, in a good mood. Imagine you can begin the first moments of your morning not thinking about yourself. It can be quite healing, because that means it's like a real new beginning. Usually what happens in the morning, you wake up with what you went to sleep with. You went to sleep angry, vengeful, you have to get even with this one, or you have to plot this thing, or you have to overcome that. Here you wake up, clean slate. Don't worry, all those thoughts are going to come back to you anyway, so it's not like you forgot them. But you wake up, the first fresh new moments, like I said, with the first fruit, instead of giving it to yourself, why don't you give it to God? And you say to him, thank you for giving me another day. Thank you for sending my soul down to this earth again, renewing the contract. And thank you for making me significant, making me indispensable. That may be the biggest thank you of all, imagine. So all the negative messages, the defeatist messages that we've learned in our homes, in our schools, especially if you grew up in a dysfunctional home, you can counter every morning, like an exercise, like a true therapeutic exercise, by saying, it makes no difference what people have told me, that I'm not worth anything, that I'm dispensable, or how people have treated me, because every morning I acknowledge the fact that my soul has returned to me is not an accident. It's not just the way of the world that everybody's soul returns every morning. You appreciate it as a miracle, as an ongoing miracle, that God is saying, I renew my contract with you, and I have put you on this earth with an indispensable mission that you have, that no one but you can accomplish. Imagine feeling that way every morning. If it becomes part of your routine, not just mechanical, a real part of your exercises, it can change your whole life. Because then it sets the tone for the rest of the day. Try it out. Try it out. But try it out like consistently, as I said at the beginning of this evening, is the persistence, not just the once in a while when you're in the mood, or when you're not in the mood, like things aren't working, so you remember, oh, I better say Modani. Try it out every morning, no matter how good things are going, no matter how bad things are going. Unconditionally. Not a big investment. It's a few moments. It doesn't make you uncomfortable. It's not like you're going to stand out. You don't have to grow a beard and wear yarmulke like I'm sitting here. None of that type of stuff. It's the privacy of your own little thoughts, and as soon as you wake up. And be surprised of this Moidani, this thank you in the morning, what kind of a power it has. So it's interesting, even though Thanksgiving is definitely in the spirit of a Jewish tradition, but in Judaism, actually, every day is Thanksgiving. I guess in the secular culture that wouldn't work, because then it wouldn't be unique. You can't have a sale every day. You can't have a parade every day. So, but in Judaism, in a small sense, you say thank you every morning. And in every corner and every opportunity that comes your way. And it's not just about the menschlichkeit, the kindness, the gesture of being appreciative and sensitive. It's deeper than that. It's not about you. That's what it comes down to. It's not just about you and what you need and who's going to serve you. It's about understanding. It's not even about the other person saying, oh, that person is... It's about recognizing that you're part of a bigger picture, and that the other human being is an indispensable note as well. And that when you got something, you received something. It's a gift that was given to you. Have you earned it? Yeah, maybe some things you did to earn it. But what's wrong with acknowledging even that? Even if you've earned it to some extent, the attitude of saying, I've earned it and therefore I don't have to appreciate it, is not necessarily a healthy one either. The worst thing is you err on the side of being too appreciative. Now, I just have to say one funny disclaimer, because I once discussed it, not this theme, I never really discussed this theme here, but a while back I spoke to somebody, and I met with him, and he's telling me, like literally, I was sitting with him an hour, I probably heard 30 times, 40 times, thank you. Telling me thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. At some point I got so upset, I said to him, what is this thank you? All your thank yous mean nothing to me. You should say one thank you, that I appreciate. You say thank you every second, then I don't even know what's real, what's not real. Because I recognized that he was like so insecure and so been hurt in his life that he constantly feels the need to justify himself. And constantly thank you, thank you, thank you. It's like trained almost like a monkey to say it. I didn't put it in those words because I felt bad for him, but I wanted to wake him up. I said, stop this thank you. The Talmud says someone that says thank you to God too many times a day, it's considered an insult. Because then it's not real. It has to be for something that's happened, something significant. So this shouldn't be taken overboard of some type of perpetual thank you that goes on, like you could make in your, screensaver. Thank you, thank you, thank you. It should be something that's heartfelt, and when necessary, send a thank you card when something happens, not just because. Now that doesn't mean you can't send one out of the blue, but don't send one every second. That's my point. So that's just as a side, as a footnote. So in that spirit, I think I don't know if the Pilgrims had this in mind, and I don't know if the Thanksgiving celebrations in New York or the world or the United States this is the message of it, but who cares? Frankly, just for me, it's an excuse to talk about this subject, and it's definitely the name of the day, and it's literally what it means to give thanks. And as I said, it's all based on principles that are absolutely in the Torah, and I have no doubt that's where they took it from. The idea of thanking when they came and landed at Plymouth Rock, and the whole Metaturkey, or whatever the whole, I don't know, where the cranberry came from. I think cranberries are also American, right? You don't know your history? Doesn't really matter. But the Thanksgiving part goes back through antiquity, and is based on, as I said, fundamental principles that I think really can be very powerful and very healing. So I want to end where I began, say thank you again to everyone here. I say it also to the web audience. And because I truly feel honored and blessed to know all of you, those of you that I know better than others, but I guess we don't really know what we don't know. Souls have their own way of recognizing each other and resonating. And if we could all, in a way, as I said earlier, two people joined together, it's like two souls against one body, or two selfless voices against one selfish one. If we could all in some way do that, we can make real shifts in our lives. And as I mentioned earlier, it's about persistence. The fact that we're sitting here is the result of a few people years ago that continued just to see each other once a week, and it grew into something. There would be no Meaningful Life Center, there'd be no Hanukkah parties or other musical tributes like the one we had last night, which those of you who are here, quite powerful and energizing. And that spirit, I want to mention that we're going to be doing a pretty, I think, unique, pioneering, interactive theatrical Hanukkah experience in a few weeks to mark the date, December 16th. And what we're going to do is, last year we did a drum circle, drumming and music and so on, but I decided to take it to another level. Hanukkah is like a story in 3 movements. So you have, the first was when the dark moments of life, when we call it the shadow, when they were in a state of despair and could not find any oil, any light. And then this spark, they discovered this small little cruse of oil. And then illumination, the third movement, which is, it burned for 8 days, and it burns till this day. So what we're going to do is, through song and some Hasidic melodies and instruments, and drums for everybody, and some unique instruments as well, try to create an interactive 3 stages, where we can, which will resonate within our soul. Our soul too goes through these 3 stages in life, where there's times of despair or darkness, where you don't see hope, hopelessness, and then there's a moment of discovery, and then there's illuminating, fanning the flames and turning it into some force. So if you're here, I mean, make it. I suggest of any time that I would make the suggestion, I'm losing my language here. Go out of your way to make it here. Let's put it this way: December 16th. Last year was a packed house, so it's usually sold out. So I would suggest pre-registering, and we'll have. I guarantee you, quite a transformative experience. And this room here will rock. So. So to go back to the thank you and the acknowledgement, I think it's something that each of us can easily exercise. Like in the next 24 hours, find someone that you think deserves a thank you from you that you may have forgotten about. That's one exercise. And the second one is tomorrow morning, starting with those thank yous, the thank you to God, to your soul. Just keeping that in mind, that there's a voice inside of you, and that you should be thanking, because it's maybe your voice of sanity. That as insane as our lives become, or insane as we become, there's always that little light inside. That's also something good to acknowledge. Like every child needs acknowledgement more than anything else, more than gifts, more than trips. A child needs just to be made aware that I'm aware of you. I know you're there. So tell your soul that once in a while, and I guarantee you that the soul will respond. So everyone have a very good evening. Tomorrow night, I just want to announce, Philip won't be here, but my son Mendel, who did a great job last night here in his prose and poetry, will be leading the class tomorrow night at 7. And then next Wednesday, I shall be here, as usual. Again, September and December 16th is the Hanukkah Party. And before you leave, if you want more information about the Hanukkah Party, here is this flyer that they have in front there, right? And I want to also announce that if anybody's interested in studying one-on-one or in smaller groups, whether text-based or other things, to take this to another level, please see Velvel right there, the guy in the blue shirt with his shining forehead. And any other way we could help you and allow your souls to soar, please don't hesitate to call upon us. Everyone have a very good evening, and a very good Thanksgiving. Many thank yous going around and around. Good night.